Hey guys, it's Elise and welcome back to another episode of My Cupcake Addiction. On today's episode, we're going over the very basics of making a giant cupcake. I'm going to use a batch of my mud cake mix. If you're not a fan of a mud cake, you could also use your own favorite recipe, but you need about as much cake mix as it will take to do you about 18 cupcakes. You're going to need some melted chocolate. I always love dark chocolate as the easiest one to work with, but you could also use milk chocolate, or you could color white chocolate or use candy melts. And I'm using a little bit of chocolate ganache. All of these recipes are going to be on one big blog post on the MyCupcakeAddiction.com website. I've got a spatula, a serrated edge knife, and I've got an offset spatula. That's a bit of an optional extra, but it does make life a little bit easier. I've got some non-stick cooking spray, and I'm using a silicone giant cupcake mold. Now, one of the main questions I always get asked with these is, do I use a metal mold? And the answer is no. They're generally stuck together like this, and I always find the top cooks about 15 minutes faster than the bottom. So I'd end up with a burnt top and then a not quite cooked bottom, and I find the cupcakes really hard to get out of the tins. I have a ton of tutorials on my channel of things that you can make using this mold, so don't think you're going to be restricted to just a giant cupcake here. So let's get started. The first thing that I always do before I go getting my case all dirty is I actually use it to make another case out of chocolate, because that way it doesn't matter how neat or how messy your cake turns out, you've got a beautiful neat chocolate case to store everything in. So in goes half of my chocolate. Just use that spatula just to bring it right up around the top edges and make sure it's pretty evenly distributed. Now, you can actually even just shake out any excess. We're going to pop that off into the fridge for 15 minutes and let that first coat set, and then we're going to repeat that process and do it again with the second coat. Alright, so when you come back from the fridge, your chocolate case should be completely set. So what you've really done there is you've made two thin coats of chocolate, and this just gives you more evenness and more stability to your base. Now, to get it out of the case, you just want to gradually just release the edges first, and then you can roll it all the way down the outside of the case. Now, with your cupcake case, be very careful not to touch it too much around the outside edges. So if I need to pick it up, I'll stick my hand in the middle and my fingers underneath, because otherwise you're going to leave fingerprints all around the outside edge, and you don't want that. Alright, so when it comes to baking your giant cupcake, the most important thing to do is grease, grease, grease. So you want to make sure that you definitely give it a really great spray, or you can really well grease it with some butter. Alright, so you want to fill your giant cupcake case. 2/3 to 3/4 is a good rule, otherwise they just don't rise high enough. So pour it in, filling that top section, and once again it's about 2/3 to 3/4 full. Now, because I know that that base needs a little bit longer to cook than the average cake, I like to cut a little circle out of some baking paper or some greaseproof paper and pop it straight down on top. That's going to help my cupcake to rise a little bit more evenly, but it's also going to protect the tops, particularly of that bottom section, from getting kind of too burnt or too crusty. Because you're using a silicone mold, they don't have the same stability that a metal mold would have, so I like to bake mine just on a baking tray. But you do want to remember, this top is going to cook in about 30 minutes and this bottom is going to cook in about 45 in a moderate oven. Once your cakes are cooked, you want to let these cool at room temperature or just on the bench for at least an hour before you even try to extract them, or they're just going to stick all over the insides of those cupcake cases. You can release them by I like to kind of just pull the silicone, and then you just want to roll it down around the outside edges, and you should just be able to pop those cake pieces out. Pop those ones onto a cooling rack and let them completely cool before you go any further, or else you're going to risk melting your chocolate cupcake case. Once your giant cupcake is completely cooled, you want to get that top section as flat as you possibly can, but we're also going to carve a little bit off the sides so that it'll fit within the confines of that giant cupcake case. Now with the top, I'm not going to do too much, I just want to flatten off this top area. And you'll see I'm always cutting into the middle here because I don't want to take like a chunk off the outside edge, and I've got a really nice flat bottom on that top section. Before we go any further, I'm also going to just cut this base in half. It enables us to put a little bit more frosting in the middle. So you should have your bottom half of your bottom, your top half of your bottom, and the top piece of your giant cupcake ready to stack in that chocolate case. I'm going to lift up that giant cupcake base and pop it back into the case. That way I can handle it and do whatever to it. If any frosting gets on the sides of it, it's going to protect the outside edges of our chocolate cupcake case. So I've got some chocolate ganache and it's room temperature, so make sure your ganache is not at all warm. In goes a decent spoonful, and we're going to start assembling the giant cupcake. I normally just drop the bottom in and then kind of just push it around. A little bit more of that chocolate ganache. spread it around a little bit. In goes the next section of cake. You can see we've got a little bit of a gap around the outside edges. The ganache really helps to fill in that gap and give you a really nice, neat cupcake. Finally, on goes the top of our giant cupcake. And do not worry if you've got a little bit of a gap around that outside edge. We can fill that in with frosting, we can fill it in with decorations. You really want to get a nice amount of height. Now I'm just giving this a really easy crumb coat. So it's like the initial coat of frosting that I'm just spreading on with the back of a spoon. This will actually set a little bit and it'll give you a really nice base that we can then decorate. Perfect. Now you can see around here I've got like a little pool of ganache. This is another great reason to be putting it back into that giant cupcake case. We can just wipe up any ganache around the edges before we extract it. To extract it, you're just going to roll down again. And it shouldn't be at all stuck in here. So long as you've got clean hands, you should just be able to pick it up and remove it from the case. So I'm using a round open piping tip today and just a disposable piping bag. And we're going to start off with the colors that are going to go around the bottom. So for me, this is going to be purple. Always make sure that you can see the frosting peeking out the end of your piping tip before you start piping. Now, I'm going to start around the outside edges. You just want to squirt like a little blob of frosting, and then I'm actually dragging the tip back up into the blob of frosting to kind of like taper it off or give it a little flat side. When you start your second row, you want to overlap here and be mindful of your spacing because you don't want to get to the top and realize that you don't have enough room. Same again with the green, coming down about halfway over the blue and moving on to yellow. Now when you get to your very top layer, I'm actually kind of curving them in a little bit at the top and I'm bringing that frosting all the way into the very center point of the top of my cupcake. Perfect. So that is your utterly adorable rainbow giant cupcake. And I'm gonna finish mine off by sticking one candle right in the top. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's Giant Cupcake Basics series. If you love this video, make sure you give it a like and give it a share. Subscribe to My Cupcake Addiction for 2 new videos every week. And as always, guys, thanks very much for watching.